My prior profession was in the medical profession, and so I used to ask that question all the time. Why is it that to treat diabetes, to treat hypertension, obesity was always through medication and not through a prescription of fresh fruits and vegetables, of diet? And a lot of it boils down to the pharmaceutical companies and who's being paid. I can always imagine a day whereby the hospitals are out of business, the pharmaceutical companies are out of business, food pantries and soup kitchens are out of business because we're starting to live healthy lifestyle. And again, we have to look at the food system. In essence, is a business. Someone is making money on the backs of poor people. I always said that because if that wasn't true, then you wouldn't see hospitals and pharmaceuticals companies making billions and billions of dollars.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project, a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label that distinguishes soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock under the organic seal. You just heard farmer and activist Karen Washington describing one of the many injustices taking place in our food system that fuel the cycle of inequity that we are all faced with addressing. Before we hear more from Karen, we want to encourage you to visit blackfarmerfund.org, where you can follow along with the work that she and others have undertaken to keep and grow land ownership in the Black farming community. Now let's get back to the conversation between myself and Karen Washington of Rise and Root Farm. So I'm joined today by Karen Washington. I'm actually really excited about this. Karen, you're a personal hero of mine. You're the owner of Rise and Root Farm in New York City, and you're just a leader to so many in the food justice movement for decades now, really. Hi, Karen.
Hi. I'm excited and thanks for the accolades, but I'm very humbled by it.
Well, you've done such an amazing job bringing to light all the racial injustices in our food system. And I would just love to start with your personal journey to farming and how you initially connected to the land.
Wow, that's a long story. I think I've been asked that question millions and millions of times. So if people follow me, they'll hear the same story because I didn't come from any sort of farming background. My parents weren't farmers. My grandparents weren't farmers. And it wasn't until I moved to the Bronx and had a backyard that I decided that I wanted to grow some food. And it was the tomato that really changed my world because back in the day, I hated tomatoes. I didn't know where my food came from. It came from the grocery store. What else? My mom was a good cook. That's all I knew really about food. But when I put that seed in the ground and nourished that plant and saw that the tomato was red, red, that I bit into it and it was so flavorful that I said, oh, I'm hooked. And then I wanted to grow everything. And what also was occurring at that time across the street was an empty lot. And for so many of us, empty lots were a signal of environmental racism because it was full of garbage and drug activity. But 3 years later, I was able to, with the community, turn that empty lot into a community garden. So that's when I got my taste of really gardening. And so for the last 30 years, I've really been looking at the food system, growing food. And in 2014, I gave up my day job, which was a physical therapist, and went on a journey with 3 of my friends up and down the Hudson Valley. Finally came to the Chester Agricultural Center in Chester, New York, and were able to secure 3 acres of land. And so we formed the Rise and Root Farm up in Chester. So here I am, still farming.
So how long do you have to drive to get to Rise and Root?
Well, it's believe it or not, I tell people it's faster for me to go from my house to the Bronx to Chester than from my house to Brooklyn. It's an hour and 15 minutes, but pre-COVID, I would stay up there at Jane and Michaela's house. I would stay over during the week and come home on the weekend. So But right now,
That
I'm
is so
going.
difficult when you're farming to be away from the spot. You know, we were renting for a long time and had to do that. It was just a 10-minute drive and it felt like too much. You know, you've got to make all these little irrigation adjustments and, you know, raise the tunnels, lower the tunnels, raise them up again, depending on the clouds and the weather. So, do you have some help up there or how do you make that
Yeah,
work?
definitely, because Jane and Michaela and Lori, they live up there. So they live up there.
Perfect.
They live within walking distance of the farm. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, we work it out. We work it out fine, thank goodness.
My origin story is very similar to yours. I tasted a sun gold cherry tomato and I was like, that what is this? This isn't even a tomato. You know, this
It's
is nothing like the
candy.
grocery store tomato. It's candy, yeah. And then my privileged daughter got to eat strawberries before we got to the sun gold patch. And she thought the sun golds like were sour in comparison to the strawberries. So she never liked tomatoes because she thought strawberries tasted better.
Oh
So
my goodness.
I was lucky to be able to give that food to her growing up. I want to touch a little bit on, you know, those that have you've inspired that are now an inspiration to others, like Leah Penniman and Onika Abraham that I've interviewed, said, you know, you were their inspiration and now they've become thought leaders themselves. And I'm curious how that makes you feel.
They call me Mama K now, and I embrace that. I embrace that name, Mama K. I have been so overwhelmed with pride of seeing so many young people really become a force in this movement, become very vocal, standing up for injustices that they see. And it's so interesting that a lot of them are women. Something about women is the women generation, women power that are really leading this movement. And I'm just so proud. I have three other young prospects that I'm looking at, and I can see within the next year or so, they're also going to be busting at the seams and really being more vocal in their quest for equal justice, especially in food and farming. So I'm happy, like I said, I'm Mama K. I'm proud taking on that name. And again, I just like to say, I'm not doing anything that anyone else would do. There are a lot of elders just like myself that are really trying to pass on the knowledge. So I'm proud of them.
Who inspired you?
You know what? People ask me that question. I have to say my parents, and the reason why I say that because both my parents died at a very young age. We were a family of four, so my mother died at 60, my father died at 68, and my brother died at 54. And when I tell people or people see who I am, I really want to make sure that they understand where I came from, how I was brought up. My parents, my mom and my dad were very great influences in my life on how they brought myself and my brother up, taught us values. And so I want to make sure that I acknowledge them whenever I'm asked that question about who inspires me, because they're not here, but they provided the groundwork for me to be the person that I am. And so thanks for asking that question. I just want to give my
Yeah,
parents
I
props.
feel that way too. My parents always said to, you know, follow what's in your heart when it came to your profession. And that's sometimes, you know, a little resentful. It's like it would have been a lot easier to have just made some money, you know. Had to go be a farmer.
Yeah,
So yeah, we got to give credit for that though.
it was so ironic. I remember, I grew up, I was a tomboy growing up, and my mother always used to say, Karen, how come when you come from school, you're not like the other girls, your bangs are this way, your ponytails are that way, your shirt is from out of your skirt. You know what? You look like a farmer. She always used to say that to me growing up. And now, Mom, look at me, Mom. See? Look at me
Was she
now.
saying that as an insult?
No, she really was. She was trying to get me to be, to be more refined, but I just couldn't because I had so much fun just playing, playing sports. I just had so much fun. I had a great childhood. And so, but at the end of the day, I know my mom and my father and my brother are smiling down on me. I'm very, very proud. I'm pretty sure they are.
Doing what you always felt was in you, huh?
Yes.
So, how do you convert an empty lot into a fertile garden? I mean, what is that process?
Yeah, so it takes a process because in many municipalities and many cities, we have to really look at the soil because in cities that are close to the highways or buildings that had lead at one time, you have to make sure, first of all, I know I can speak for New York City, that we have to take the old soil out, put down a barrier, and bring in fresh topsoil and compost. And that's happened in my garden. My garden now is 33 years, so you can imagine now 33 years, and how the soil is. We've had soil tests, and it's really, really remarkable. Out at 30 years being in production, continuing to add compost every year to it. Our soil is really, really rich in organic matter, and I think that's really, really important as people think about farming and gardening in cities to make sure that soil fertility is very, very important. The soil is organic; it is a living thing, and so we have to make sure that we treat it that way. And so composting has been very, very instrumental in really bringing in richness in the soil in the city. Too bad because of COVID and budget cuts, the city just stopped the composting initiative. But hopefully, fingers are crossed, is that so many people, both the public and private sector, are finding ways to bring that back. I think it's very, very important that we live in a city that waste doesn't go into landfills, that we can turn that organic matter into something that's really rich and really important, as part of environmental, justice, and really thinking about the whole ecosystem at large. So, yeah, 33 years in the Garden of Happiness. Again, we always advise people who really start for the first time in cities and that first of all know the history of that lot. Was it were abandoned buildings placed on it? And have that soil tested. And then, what you can do is, like I said, talk to municipalities to bring in fresh topsoil and compost, and the rest will take care of itself.
I actually did something similar when I got started, brought in a bunch of compost and it had persistent herbicides in it. It was from manure, and when the cows eat the pasture that's been sprayed with a broadleaf specific herbicide, it is like a hormone in that parts per billion stay through the digestive gut of the cow, through the composting process, and my tomatoes. And there's certain crops that were affected and certain crops that weren't.
Yeah.
So we knew with that, they call it a bioassay, that it was an herbicide. It was just shocking to me that contamination at so the smallest doses could affect, and it just raised my awareness of pollutants and how and you don't really get this until it's affected you personally in some way. I didn't have a tomato crop for 5 years or a pepper crop. I just
Yeah.
grew cucumbers because they didn't react to it. And so it was this huge awareness of the use of things and how long they can last in our environment. I'm wondering if you've had any of those personal stories too, where you realize our effect on the environment from things we do.
Well, I think, I live in the Bronx, and we have high incidence of asthma. A lot of municipalities, especially if you live in an environment where you have constant movement of trucks going in and out. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of inner cities have, and that is high incidence of asthma because of the traffic. And so the pollutants that are constantly in the air. I think what this COVID has really done is really realize how when, we had a period of time when we didn't use our cars, how all of a sudden, the air started to feel fresh and it was breathable. And so it just brings to the point how important air quality is. And when you live in a city where it's constant automobile traffic, and even if you live near a airport, again, those are the people, especially in urban areas, that are going to be affected by pollutants. So, like you said, it's very, very important for people to really be cognizant of the fact of the soil, what is being sprayed upon in soil, but also what is it that the particles of that we're breathing within our air. which are both environmental things that we need to discuss and talk about within communities, especially municipalities.
Yeah, I've also heard you say that food is just connected to everything, right? It's
Oh,
not only our health and the environment, but our education, our class, our race. And if we want to be good advocates for a better food system, we've got to address all of these things. And you said take an intersectional approach. Can you talk about that?
yeah, definitely. Because when I first started growing food, my concentration was growing food. I wanted to, to grow the best tomatoes and the best collards. And while I was in my community, what I was finding is that there was so many social issues. I'm in the garden and I'm hearing people having problems with asthma and have no health insurance. I hear people that, the rent is so high and they have 10 in a family. Um, they couldn't afford decent housing. I heard people talking about overcrowding in school. And I heard people saying, I have type 2 diabetes and hypertension, but I don't have insurance. And so all of a sudden, by just being in that garden, just focusing on food, all of a sudden I saw how it sort of intersected so many social issues that were surrounding me. And then I said, wait a second, I just can't be focusing on growing food because there was such an intersection that was happening, social issue that was happening around me, and how even food was affecting all those different points. And so for me, it really brought to the forefront, when the people would say, oh, the food system is broken, and, and it needed to be fixed. And at one time I was drinking that Kool-Aid and I used to believe that, but I said, no, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's based on race, it's based on class, it's based on economics. A lot of things is based on. And so I really started to look at food, but also look at food in a way of organizing. And so for me, it's more than just growing food, is really looking at the impact that food has on social issues in my community. And I will continue to advocate for that.
So there's a movement for food sovereignty now. Can you explain what that means to people who haven't heard that term?
Okay, first of all, we're going to talk, I guess we'll talk about food justice and food sovereignty because, again, those terms, I tell people those terms mean nothing. They're being co opted.
Okay.
Because if you're really talking about food sovereignty, you really have to talk about this transformation, this actual action steps that you have to take. Because when food sovereignty is really getting people who have been marginalized with people who have power over, preventing them from owning their own land, owning their own way of living, owning the right for them to grow food, to save seeds. And so what food sovereignty is that ownership for people that have been marginalized to take back that power so that in essence they control how they live, where they eat, all those things when they're talking about sovereignty. And also we need to give credit to where did that come from? It came from the global south. It came from indigenous and peasant farmers who for so long have been fighting for that right to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. And another thing about food sovereignty, which is so important, because if you look at the food system for so long, especially here in the West in a capitalistic society, that has been very extractive. And what food sovereignty wants to make sure is that everybody has a say within that community, and that the resources that are made within that community stays within that community, building social capital and communal wealth.
And so you've also used the term food apartheid. And I'm wondering if you could explain that one.
Oh boy, you opened up a can of
It's
worms
it's
because
better than food desert, which is what I
oh
learned.
please, yeah, you learned it. I learned it too, and it's like, wait a second, you talking about me? You talking about my community? You talking about where I live? Outside a term. First of all, you don't even live in my community, and using an outside term to denote, the inability for us to have food, access to food. And so, looking back, I said, wait a second, you're missing the point because you're talking about a locale, but you're really not talking about the heart of the problem when you're talking about food. And so I coined the term food apartheid Because first of all, when you say food apartheid, people listen. You're listening. It's like what is that? What is apartheid doing? Well, it's really talking about the oppressive behavior in the food system. And I wanted people to peel back the layers of the food system to look at how it impacts along race, how it impacts along economics, and how it impacts along demographics, and people start having that hard conversation around our food. Because prior to that, when you said food deserts, it's more like statisticians looking at and said, okay, so these are communities that don't have a supermarket or don't have access to food. And I tell people, yes, we do have access to food. If you really want to talk about a food desert, first of all, the desert, people talk to me, the people in the desert, they do have food. But we do have food. We have the junk food, the processed food, the fast food. So what we don't have are healthy food options. And so let's talk about the reality within our food systems of the haves and have not. Because at the end of the day, fresh, healthy food and clean, healthy water are both human rights.
Absolutely. And why? Like, why is that food cheap? Why is that food more available?
Oh,
It's
it's why, because it can be dumped on. It can be dumped on people who feel that they're getting food, but it has no nutritional value. When the government first talked about farm subsidies, it was supposed to help the farmer. But now it's becoming like a cash cow, and people in big ag, industrial ag, is just saying, you know what? We have a process now that we can take a lot of commodity foods and make it so it's cheap and pour it into communities that feel that it's less for them to buy something that's cheap, instead of something that's expensive. And so again, being brainwashed, I would say whitewashed, in some respect, to thinking that cheap food is healthy food, when in fact it isn't. It's killing us. It's making us sicker and sicker.
Yeah, I remember hearing a doctor who, went through years and years of medical education, and he just said a calorie is a calorie. He heard me talking about my organic food, and it's just that mindset that, you just need calories in order to be healthy is so off. And we just have such a long way to go in teaching, the smartest people, our doctors that are supposed to be taking care of us, that nutrition is important.
Yeah, my prior profession was in the medical profession, and so I used to ask that question all the time. Why is it that to treat diabetes, to treat hypertension, obesity was always through medication and not through a prescription of fresh fruits and vegetables, of diet? And a lot of it boils down to the pharmaceutical companies and who's being paid. I can always imagine a day whereby the hospitals are out of business, the pharmaceutical companies are out of business, food pantries and soup kitchens are out of business because we're starting to live healthy lifestyle. And again, we have to look at the food system. In essence, is a business. Someone is making money on the backs of poor people. I always said that because if that wasn't true, then you wouldn't see hospitals and pharmaceuticals companies making billions and billions of dollars.
So I'm a young kid. I live in a place where there's a food apartheid. I don't have access to land, but I want to farm. I want to grow vegetables. I've got a green thumb. What do we have to do to help that kid succeed?
Well, you know what? I tell people, first of all, I mean, if you don't have land, and you live in a city, first of all, I always tell people, ask a neighbor that may have a front yard or a backyard. A lot of religious institutions and public institutions also have land. Ask if you can tend a neighbor's backyard, especially the elderly. Now, I remember as a physical therapist, I had patients who had strokes, and I would see their backyard. And I said, Miss Washington, look at my backyard. It's full of weeds. And I would go in there and I would clean it out. And I said, ding, an idea what it would take for young people or people just to come in and help, a lot of our elders who have homes and have backyards and no longer can take care of them. And so there are ways for people to still get involved, even if you don't have land. You can always volunteer, always find partial work on a lot of farms and a lot of gardens. I think the biggest thing is to ask. I think a lot of us don't really put our hopes and dreams out in the open. I was on a call this morning, and it was about really, dreaming big. And so for those of you out there young who say, I can't find land, and I want a garden, I want a farm, put it out to the universe. I mean, that's how, believe it or not, that's how we got Rise and Root. That's how we got Rise. That's how we got our land, because we would go to seminars and workshops and other people were getting land and we weren't getting land. And so I happened to continue to just put it out. And someone heard me and said, here's a telephone number, call this number, and the rest is history. So folks out there, young people, especially with the stars in your eyes and you want to farm, let me give you some advice. First of all, farming is hard work. It's spiritual work. It's hard work. Secondly, try not to farm alone. It's best if you can farm in community. And third, really, really understand exactly what you want, where you want to go. And lastly, put it out in the universe that you want land to farm, because someone might hear you and get you that land.
Yeah, I think about my own journey, and I did that. And it was Chris Newman that pointed out to me that there was privilege in that. I had a friend who said, I've got land in my front yard. You can farm it. And it was in a wealthy white community that had a, booming farmers market, close to town. And I started to think about, I always thought I had this struggling landless farmer story. And then I started to think about the connections that got me to where I am. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to acknowledge that it was probably easier for me than it might be for someone who didn't have those connections. For sure it was. And just try to figure out, I love putting it out there in the universe and just keep telling people what you want to do. And hopefully we can kind of cross, into different communities and figure out how we can help each other get there.
And believe it or not, a lot of black and brown folks got land. Let me tell you something. A lot of our history is from the South, the great migration from the South. And a lot of us left that land behind. So a lot of us still have land in the South. A lot of us still come from Caribbean countries, and there's land there. So what I try to tell people is, wait a second, because now young people are starting understanding the power of land ownership, and they want to go back to the land. And so what I try to preach too is like, wait a second, you sit down with the family and explain to them how important that land is. Because for so long, we've gone away from the land. I think that was our biggest mistake, going away from the land, thinking that farming was slave work, and as a result, letting that land just stay there, not paying taxes, or having the land being forcibly taken away from us. And so now I speak to young people and they say, yeah, we got land in the South. We got land in Jamaica. We got land in the Caribbean. We got land in Puerto Rico. We got land in the Dominican Republic. I tell them, hold on to that land. You want to farm? Hold on to that land, because that's your legacy. That's your power. And so, believe it or not, I just got a call yesterday of a young man. A friend of mine called me and says, Karen, I got a young man. His grandfather gave him 3 acres of land in North Carolina. He doesn't have any farming experience, but he's taking his brothers and sisters and they're going down there. Can you talk to him? And it's not always about white privilege, because there are black and brown people that have land in their family. And so now it's like, okay, sitting down with the grandparents, the great grandparents, and say, you know what, it's time I want access to that land so I can farm. A different total narrative than when I was young. And if I would say I want that land to go farm, it's like you wouldn't even mention that. But now young people have the courage now to go to family members and say, I want to farm, because now the narrative of farming is changing within the black and brown community, where they know that farming and land access is powerful.
Ooh, that's a tribute to you, I'm sure, and many others. I mean, I think that it's got to be complicated. I remember hearing Leah Penniman say, she was reading Elliot Coleman's book and she related, but she thought, what is my story in all this? And there's a story of oppression here in relation to land, and how do I kind of overcome this?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you something. In 2008, I went to Santa Cruz. This program called CASFIS, um, out in Santa Cruz, California, which is a program, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food System, where you learn about how to grow organically. And I remember, even though I had been gardening for a while, I remember the first day going out and seeing these vast acres of land. And it hit me, that trauma surface, that, am I doing the right thing? Do I belong? Is it true about slavery? All those internal things start to surface. And I said, Karen, you got to go to the land. Go to the land and put your hands in the soil. And that's what I did. I went to the land because I had to meet my fear. I went to the land, I put my hands in the soil, and I felt that connection of belonging. That changed my life. That changed my life because I think listening to those stories that have been embedded in our heads as black and brown young men and women growing up about, land being slave work and farming being slave work, I didn't know that somehow was still embedded inside me until I was confronted at looking at that land and saying to myself, doubting myself, if I belong. And it wasn't until I put my hands in that soil, then I felt that connection of belonging. And when I tell young people, especially when they come to our farm, take off your shoes and socks so your feet can feel the soil. Take your hands and put your hands in that black dirt so it can feel that connection, because I think that's really powerful. I think that's what we're missing, is that connection to Mother Earth, with our feet planted in soil, with our hands planted in soil, to see that nature human connection is so, so powerful. And that changed my life.
Yeah, on my farm, we'd probably step on a lot of thistle, but I get it. I completely get it. I can't go barefoot on my farm.
No.
That's beautiful. I love that. And it's true. And there's something about the smell of dirt after the rain.
Mm-hmm.
It changes depending on what's going on out there, and being in connection to all that. It's why I love doing it. You miss that when you're not gardening, you just miss that connection to what's going on.
Yep.
So I want to talk about Black Lives Matter because I'm so excited that it's happening. I feel empowered by it and hope that it continues. And I get frustrated when white people will have a friend, a Black friend who, rose out of from being poor, rose out of poverty, and it's their success story. And it's like, see, I have this friend and they did it. And, that's what this country's all about. What aren't they understanding about the need for this movement?
Just the fact that we have a leader that is going to say they're going to come into your suburban neighborhoods. Wait a second. Who is they? You know what? We're supposed to be the United States of America, where everybody is equal. But when you start using, they are coming into your neighborhoods, they are taking your jobs, right then and there, when you start saying they, there is a problem, because there's two worlds. And I want to know, when people say they, who is the they? Because you know exactly who you're talking about when they say they come into you, take your jobs, and they come in and take you into your neighborhoods. They're going to come, disrupt your way of living. And so I want, in order for the change to happen that we're seeing at this moment, white people have to step up and condemn and shut down racism. They have the voices, especially those with power and privilege. They're the ones that have to be more vocal in this movement of Black Lives Matter. They have to be at the forefront saying Black Lives Matter. This is what we're going to do for change. And the thing about it, this is so systemic. People are thinking about a quick change. It's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. Donations are fine, but donations are different than investment. Donations, you're going to give money and that's it. And you feel, oh, I gave, to the cause. I feel, because I gave to the cause now. I understand what Black Lives Matter. But no, investments means that you are in for the long haul, that you are not only donating, but you're help to fix the problem of systemic racism. We're not out of the woods yet. I mean, it's good that it's a moment in time where people are starting to look within their organizations, the food and farming organizations, especially food and farming. I just can't, this idea in my head where we are so excited as farmers to see diversity in flowers, see diversity in plants, see diversity in animals, but yet we don't have that same thirst of seeing power and equity equal within our own people. And I just can't understand it. I can't understand to be in a room of an organization and everybody is white. Everybody in the upper echelon is white. The boards are white, but yet you work in a industry, a system of food and farming that has diversity, but yet your own organizations are not diverse. And so that's a problem that I have, because don't tell me about, injustice when your own organizations are all homogenized.
Onika Abraham stood up in a room of white people at the first, predominantly white people at the first Real Organic Project Symposium and pointed that out. And I can't imagine how brave that was to do that. I don't know if I could do that. And I guess I'm wondering if you can maybe describe, just what it takes to do something like that. And I'm frustrated that she even had to do it, frankly. But
so I was asked to be a keynote speaker for this organization, a farmland organization, and I'm sitting there. My keynote was in the afternoon, so I sat there in the morning, and I'm waiting for people to come in that look like me. So it's now afternoon. No one is coming in and look like me. And the whole time I sat there, I heard everything framed around the existence and theories of white people. Never mentioned anything about indigenous properties, indigenous knowledge, black people knowledge. I sat there. Then they talked about resources, how access to land, access to animals. And then I think what happened is when one of the speakers was talking about diversity and how important it is, and then he ended, it's so good that we need to have the diversity in our cattle. So when they asked me to come up and introduce me, I put my papers down and I said, I cannot go on with the prepared keynote because I'm looking at this room and I'm invisible. I'm looking at this room and I listen to y'all all morning long talk about food and farming around a reference of white privilege. Where are the blacks here? Where are the people of color in this room? You talk about farming as if we don't exist. Your framework on farming, your knowledge of farming, never once did you include what my people have done when it comes to food and agriculture. You never even thought about so many people, so many black and brown people who are yearning for land, but you have the ability to give your white people access to land. There was silence. People came, because see, when you're in a bubble and you live in a community that everyone looks alike, You don't have that privilege of reality of how it is outside of your world. And I tell people time and time again, if you really, really want to know, you really want to think, walk into the shoes of food and social justice, then you've got to get out of your comfort zone and go into poor neighborhoods or marginalized communities of color and see how they live. Go into their supermarkets and see the food. Go into their neighborhoods and see how they live. See if garbage is picked up. See overcrowding in big apartment buildings where the elevator doesn't work. See parks where they can't even go and have a good time because it's full of garbage. Go and see how people who are citizens of these United States are living like they're in a third world country. It's important now, since we've had this pandemic, that it's affecting a whole lot of people. A whole lot of people who once felt that they had that power and privilege have now come down a peg because now they have joined the ranks of essential workers and people that are on food lines and soup kitchens and food pantry lines who no longer have a job. And so reality is starting to set in from all people who at once had power and privilege to understand what it is to no longer have a paycheck, no longer be able to pay your bills, your rent. People are starting to feel that pinch. Well, folks, wake up, because a lot of us have been living like that for centuries. Paycheck to paycheck, or homeless, or living on with assistance. And so the reality is again, people have to be able to appreciate and feel the essence of how others live. And we are supposed to be in the greatest country in the world, but yet we have so many problems, so many divisions that we need to work through. And so when it comes to Black Lives Matter, it doesn't matter for a day. It doesn't matter for a week. It doesn't matter for a month. It doesn't matter for a year. It matters all the time. And until people understand that we're part of the human race, there's one race, and that's the human race, then we need to treat each other with equity and dignity. And that is something that people have to work on.
I wonder if the best way to break through is a little bit more like a change in our education system. I mean, I had to kind of search on my own through the teachings of Leah about redlining. I had no idea that that was even a thing. How do we kind of tell the story of how it really happened? I mean, it has to go so deep into our educational system. I mean, are we going to be able to do that?
Forget about, I didn't learn anything about farming from my educational system. I didn't learn anything about organizing from my educational system. I went into the community. I went into the trenches. I listened to people. I attended meetings. I attended workshops. I went into the trenches. I went into communities to listen to what people... You're not going to get the essence of what is happening from school in a book. People need to get out of their comfort zone and go into communities that they know nothing about and sit and listen. Listen to what people are doing in terms of organizing around health, around housing, around education, around the environment. We talk about climate change. We talk about climate change in a way and we know the importance of climate change, but do you think that really is traveling down to a person who has no heat or hot water, doesn't know where the next meal is going to come from? And so, we talk in elitist terms and we talk into terms of ideals when we really need to find out how does climate change really impact to that person that's on the street sleeping on a bench. And so we got to be very cognizant of how we address certain things that are paramount. Yes, climate change is paramount. Yes, even eating healthy organic food is paramount, but it doesn't resonate with people whose whole life is being held down because they don't have the essential of human resources to survive. And so, you know, I go in these workshops and these webinars, and I sit there and I hear, people talking about all these important things, and I know their importance. And then I say to myself, how do I go back to my community and make them understand how important these things are when they're just trying to survive and they're in a world where the system is not working for them? Not working for them. You're saying go to school, get a job, and doors will open. Well, you can go to school and get a job, and the doors not will always open for others. And so we need to again understand at this point in time, there's two worlds. I'm telling you, there's two worlds. And if you don't believe it, you got to go out your comfort zone. And you got to ask the question, why are these people continuing to walk and march in the street day in and day out? There's got to be a reason. The fact is that we're at a point in time in history, we're not going back. We're not going back to the way things are. A change has to happen, and a change is going to come. It's inevitable. Change is going to come. How that change looks, it depends on who is going to join in and fight for humanity, or who is going to still allow the status quo of inequality to continue to exist. So there's two ways. Are people going to jump on the movement of diversity and inclusion, or they're going to stay in a movement that is segregated and oppressive? And so, I mean, that's where it's headed. That's where it's headed. That's where this country is headed as it becomes more brown. As the country becomes more brown, it's up to people to either embrace it or be left behind.
I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about what you're focusing on now, where your work is going.
So I'm focusing along with Onika and Leah. So I think the next step in our movement, we're talking about food justice and food sovereignty. Now we're emphasizing on communal wealth and what that looks like. I think for so long, Black people have been out of building communal wealth within that community. We've been labeled poor, marginalized, and we have to refrain from having outsiders use those terms to define who we are as community, because there's a richness in our community of self-reliance and self-sufficiency. And so we're working on starting a Black Farmer Fund. And the Black Farmer Fund is specifically in New York State. And so why a Black Farmer Fund? Because out of 57,000 farmers in New York State, only 139 are Black. Out of the billions and billions of dollars that farmers make, the average farmer in New York State, white farmer, makes about $48,000 a year. A Black farmer makes minus $910 a year. And so we're starting to look at the inconsistency of inequality when it comes to wealth within the Black community, and start having those conversations about wealth building that is not extractive, but builds on the wealth that we have within our community. And so I'm very excited about that. We're starting with community discussions. We have this pilot program going on where for the next month or so, every other week, we'll sit down and start having conversation about what does wealth look like. The history of Black wealth. At one time, Black people had a lot of land and had a lot of wealth. What happened to it? What are some of the obstacles that prevent Blacks from maintaining and holding on to that wealth? What systems in place continue to exclude us, continue to be oppressive? that, again, takes the money out of our community. And so having those hard conversations has really been enlightening for me. The fact that just to hear about some of the black businesses that are out there, the history of Tulsa, Oklahoma, for one, as a vibrant community, and what happened once people who didn't have power and privilege thought that black people were getting too high and mighty and couldn't understand black people have wealth and they don't have it, and burned it down. And so, again, trying to look within the community as terms of investing back into the community and looking through a different lens of power. So I'm excited about that. And hopefully next year we'll be able to start our first charitable loan and grant system that will be geared towards black farmers and black businesses in New York State. Hopefully what we're trying to do is that once we get this Black Farmer Fund up and running, and that we've done all the work, that we can take it and say, here Detroit, here Baltimore, here Oakland, here Philly, we've done the work, take it, run with it. Because again, we need to have those systems in place and that education in place about what black wealth looks like. We're not going to get it in a textbook, but we are going to get it from within our community. So I'm excited about that.
So you kind of envision it being like a series of chapters that, they can replicate the model in the different cities?
Definitely. Right now we're doing the hard work. We're doing the plus and minuses. But eventually, yes, it'll be replicated within those communities that for so long have been deemed powerless, that will become powerful.
Why do you think the organic certification process is so exclusive to people of color?
Because organics itself has been the whole word organic, the whole elitist. And I think when it started out, I'm pretty sure the intention wasn't about, organics being elitist. I think when organic certification and farmers going to organic, it was a way of controlling the narrative around the importance of soil fertility, of the intention of really monitoring the soil and how we grow things intentionally. But again, as politics and the public gets a hold of anything, it then becomes divisive, and it then becomes a way of dividing people of the haves and have-nots. Because in essence, if you tell a lot of people of color about organics, they'll tell you it's white people food. Well, that's white people, because again, we don't talk about the cost and value of food within our communities, especially communities of color, where we're surrounded by a subsidized charity-based food system where food is dumped into our communities and essentially free. And so even within my community, where I run my farmers market in the Bronx, I have to talk to my customers about the cost and value of food. That is not free. That the reason why it costs a certain amount is because I'm the farmer. I need to get paid. There's labor that's attached to that produce. There is money that I have to pay for tolls and gas. There's rent that there's a lot of things that are attached to that maybe $2 carrot or $2 beet that you have to pay. But it's having those hard conversations about the cost and value of food. And so with organics, what has happened is that people with power and privilege has latched on to that and has owned it in such a way that, again, the price is high and they're willing to pay that high price. And as a result, it's become elitist. And what it has done is left behind the people that need it the most, that need that healthy food the most, but at a high price. And so at Rise Root Farm, what we try to do is at least make sure that, yes, there's a cost and a value for that food, but everyone should have a right to pay a fair price for that food. And so, and that's something that the organics and really has to sort of talk about, how the term organic has been co-opted, like food justice and food sovereignty, in a way that has really made it very, very elitist. And the value doesn't trickle down to the people that need that food the most, and has become you know, for rich people. Only rich people can afford food that's organic, and that's healthy, and it leaves out so many other people that really need that food. So be very, very careful on how we, communicate the work that we do, and making sure that, everyone has that right no matter what. Because at the end of the day, folks, as farmers, what happens if we don't sell that food at our farmers market, right? It comes back to the farm.
Yeah. Well, I always, as a farmer, I was annoyed with a lot of the nonprofits that would come to the farmers market and want free food, and I would want them to pay for it. And so I'm wondering, like, as a business model, what can I do as a farmer to be more aware of where my food is going in a way that keeps me farming still?
Again, going so if you have so you have perfect example. So you said that the nonprofits wanted the free food. And it's like what you need to say is like, what, I need to go and speak to your nonprofit, to your organization, because they need to understand why the food is not free. Again, having those conversations within the community. We don't have that conversation with the community. How do you have a conversation with communities when, for a given, food has been dumped in? Food pantries and soup kitchens give away food like it's crazy. This is before the pandemic. And so now you're asking people who already got free strawberries and potatoes to ask, now you're going to ask them to pay for it? And so that's what I was up against. Starting my farmers market in the Bronx 18 years ago, it was like, or trying to start a CSA, it was like, why are we paying for this? We get it free. And again, going into my community and having them understand that it's me. You're supporting me. It's a cost and value to that. Come to the farm or come to the garden and see what it takes to grow that food, what it takes to come down from upstate, to pay tolls, to put gas, to buy boxes, crates, seeds, all those things, and have that hard conversation, which we don't have. And so because I've had that conversation with my community, they're willing to pay. And in some instances, they're not, they can't pay. And if they can't pay, I understand. We'll still make sure that people are fed. But the bottom line is that our food is not free. And I have to, and I have to educate people with that. And again, we don't have those conversations. So I would suggest that when a nonprofit says that, then you say, I need to speak. I need to come to your community and I need to have that conversation about the cost and value of food, so people understand.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the statistics, and it's like 98% of the land is owned by white, predominantly men. How do we shift this to get more in balance?
Because we have to, again, the truth. You're not going to get it in the books. Globally, who are the farmers? Women.
Women!
Hello?
Yeah.
Women. Again, you're not going to get on it until we shout and out to the rafters, until we start talking about our stories. We don't talk about our stories as women. We don't talk. That's our weapon. Our weapon is for us to tell our stories. Because once you tell your story, people have pulled power over you, sit down and they start to listen. That's our weapon. That's our ammunition as women. Tell our stories. Go out and continue to tell our stories. Tell the truth. The majority of farmers in the world are women. What we don't have as women, access to land, capital, technology, all in the hands of a few white men, companies, and we need to change that. And the change is going to come.
Thank you, Karen.
You're quite welcome.
I know you're a busy woman. Thank you for giving me an hour. I'm
Yeah.
moved. I'm changed. and I hope I get to do it again.
Continue to ask those hard questions. Continue.
Okay.
All right?
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to today's conversation. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you found us. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to today's conversation, is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 32. Please join us next time for an interview with Dartmouth labor history professor and author of We Are All Fast Food Workers Now, Annalise Orlek. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms.